Ricardo Baretzky, now the president of the European Centre for Information Policy and Security, joining us live here on RT International today. Mr. Baretzky, thanks for coming on. Good to see you. We understand that now ISIS is saying that this Afghan axe-wielding asylum seeker was one of their soldiers. Any surprise to you?
Absolutely not. I think this is exactly turned out as expected, seeing that the risk is increasing. I must also add that I don't think they're laughing anymore. If we recall, today it's actually almost exactly 1 year since the ECIP's announced the Exodus alert. And, these problems is exceedingly increasing and causing a major divide amongst many within Europe.
OK, so we've had this attack in the past 16 hours in Germany. In Nice the other day, we had another horrific attack there. You can go back a couple of months to the Paris attacks as well. Is there an increase, Mr. Baretzky, of these kinds of attacks occurring in Europe?
Well, I think we can, if we just look at the historical record over the last 2 years, we have seen a systematic increase almost on a monthly basis of problems somewhere within either on the borders of the European Union or within the European Union. The real issue here is that we have to begin to look at what's the real solutions. And it's time that, the officials realize that the proposed solutions is non-functionable and doesn't work. And at the same time, there should be a serious alert about the spreading of hatred amongst population and migrants. This is a very dangerous, and I cannot express it more, a situation which is still not really taken to grips. And I would be very surprised if they don't get it yet.
But what about when it comes to German officials? Certainly German security is known in Europe for being some of the best in the world. Can they take some blame for this? Do they need to amp up their protection?
Well, what they fail to understand is the psychology. It's good to say, well, we fight a war on terror, but in reality, this is a kind of war on ideology. Why? Because we have to look at the motives behind these attacks. These attacks is not just widely or just randomly picked. They are attacks that specifically works in a specific way. And here's a classic example of a youngster which is undetected and in a migrant application system and exercised and one of the attacks. And this is a real threat to all of Europe and the whole world. It's not just to Europe as a whole. And it's really important to pay attention to these developments.
This is something the Russian president has said time and time again. Vladimir Putin has always said that terrorism is a global threat and it should be taken on a united front. And just recently we had this biggest NATO summit in Warsaw, the biggest since the days of the Cold War, and they decided that Russia was the biggest threat to the world and not ISIL. I think as we go on with further breaking news, months, weeks, day in, day out, what is the biggest threat right now? Because as far as I can tell, ISIL terrorists seem to be infiltrating Europe and causing all sorts of mayhem.
Absolutely. Today, the #1 threat in the world is terrorism. There's no question about it. Anybody who says different is denying the fact. And we have to focus as a global community. If these issues is not constantly, or these issues continue constantly without forming a global coalition, right? They're going to worsen and worsen day after day. And the more important issue is that we live in a society where the risk of spreading idealism coupled with hatred or personal expressions in that way is a very dangerous situation globally. And we have to really get to understand that this is not just a problem. This is a psychological problem that has to be evaluated, why these events is happening and what can be done to prevent it.
We've seen videos, we've run videos before online of hate preachers, for example, calling for Muslims to spread into Europe, even calling for Muslims to mate with Europeans. Some say part of fundamentalism's plans would be to fracture Europe, to change the face of Europe. Is that happening?
Well, we have said in our report in 2014, which was released in December 16th, called the Islamic State, which was widely published in material, that this ideology is not new. To many, the concept of ISIL is only a few years old, but in reality, this goes a long time back. And I think that this has its roots in the colonial base, and it's very important that analysts learns the proper analytical capability, because ultimately prevention of these type of problems is based on analytical capability. It's not based on policing or law enforcement, neither the military. And the fact that they fail to analyze right tells us there's a serious problem in the way intelligence, particularly counterintelligence, is working.
But when it comes to the blame game, for example, Mr. Baretzky, is it possible the average European is falling victim to, shall we say, various governments' foreign policies? You look at the war zones in the Middle East, you look at the influx, the exodus of refugees and migrants, and yet the average European here seems to be left hanging in the wind.
Well, why does this problem happen? Well, we have to pay attention to the history, and we have to pay attention. Destabilization of the Middle East is no good thing. It brings nobody good. And I think that they have missed the point of the humanity, and the human factor is involved here. And the human factor is as such that if his basic needs are threatened, then he searches for other ideologies. And this is exactly what we are witnessing. And that is the situation that gives ISIL the upper hand, and they can utilize that in the recruitment process, particularly the self-recruitment process. And this is the analytical part that they seem to fail to understand. We can't wait for the fire to burn down the house. We've got to react when there's smoke. And the problem is there was no reaction when there was smoke.
What about, though, the reaction of just the average European, though? Because there is this growing sentiment now, whether it's opposed to migrants or on a broader encompassing level, that of Islamophobia, opposed to Islam. When are we going to start seeing, should we call them radicalized Europeans, actually taking centre front stage and fighting back against what the media is telling them is a mass influx of terrorism?
Well, I think and this is a very sensitive question, as you know, and I can only answer in a specific way. But at the same time, I think what we have to understand is that the voice of the people cannot be underestimated. And by constantly doing that, you are putting the risk factor or the security of everything at risk, not only the state or not only the people. And by the political arena, realize that they're not competent in facing this real problem. And while people that is competent has been put out of offices, I must add, it's a situation where we say, well, this is not a thing about academics. This is an issue that has to be paid attention to from people who's been on the ground, understand it, has been in Africa, has seen the guerrilla warfare, has seen these processes. Because the reality is we're living in a world that needs stability. Anything in Europe affects the rest of the world too. So nobody wants this. It's fundamentally important that we spread the correct word. And what is the correct word? The correct word is finding solutions that gives a productive society.
All right, Ricardo Baretzky, the president of the European Centre for Information Policy and Security. Thank you so much for joining us today on RT International. Thank you.
Thank you.